Good afternoon and welcome to the next concurrent session of the day, How COVID Changed Us. Our presenter today is Dr. Jennifer Johnke. Dr. Johnke is the Department Chair of General Education and Math faculty at South College Atlanta campus. She spent 20 years in K-12 education before moving into higher education, earning her doctorate in educational administration from the University of South Dakota. If you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenter, Dr. Jennifer Johnke.
Thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who is joining me here today. I did wonder when I titled this, if people would look at the presentation and think to themselves, we know that COVID changed us, because when in the past have we had to worry about wearing masks on an airplane, or whether or not we should shake hands when we meet somebody new, or if we're standing far enough apart? Those things have really changed us in the past 2 years. However, in education, we've also seen a great change because of things that were thrown at us. And so I'm going to jump a little bit into that today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And start my presentation. There we go. So as I said, we're going to talk about how COVID changed us. And I had a great introduction there getting us going, but I did want to jump a little bit into that because
Dr. Johnke, sorry for interrupting. I just want to let you know that we're seeing your presenter view.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
No worries. Just wanted to let you know.
Oh, that's perfect. I don't actually have any notes. You'll see over here, no notes. So let me grab that and drag it over here. Okay, let me see. Of course, technology is great when it works and not so great when it doesn't. Let me go to my display settings here. There we go. I'll bet that did it. Did it not?
It did. It fixed it.
Okay, perfect. Good. Like I said, technology is great when it works, which we're also going to talk about when we get into a little bit of my presentation, because sometimes things do not go as we plan them to go. So again, a little bit about me. I earned my education, actually, all 4 of those came from the University of South Dakota. I was thinking about that as I was debating whether or not to admit that I hail from South Dakota. I actually, when I tell people that now that I'm in Atlanta, many people, they react with, oh, they don't expect people to have lived in South Dakota. So that's where I came from. I am the Department Chair of General Education and also Math faculty at South College on the Atlanta campus. Coming from South Dakota, we are loving the 70 degrees in Atlanta right now. I also included my previous experience because, as you're going to find out, it really has impacted how I have approached things, not only at the K-12 level, but also at post-secondary and where I am at now. Most importantly, this presentation is going to focus around my experience as high school assistant principal. And as high school assistant principal, I was in charge of attendance and discipline, which I'm sure everyone on here is thinking, oh man, that sounds like a glorious role. And while it did come with some challenges, it actually provided me with some insight in helping students at all levels succeed and making connections with them. And again, what we're going to look at today, when I was high school math teacher, I was actually on a committee that wrote the new attendance policy for the school district. And what I didn't know at the time is that the following year, I was going to be hired as the high school assistant principal in the same building and would be in charge of implementing and enforcing that attendance policy. And that was a challenge, but it also helped me learn some things that I took with me in my following experiences. So for many years, educators could rely on teaching the way that they had always taught, which was most likely also the way they themselves had been taught. When you think about your style in your instruction, most likely it is mirrored after perhaps your favorite teachers or instructors, or a compilation of several of those instructors throughout the years, where you took what worked for you and you made it into your instructor style. However, on or about March 13th, 2020, the world came to a screeching halt. Many institutions closed on that Friday, the 13th, and did not reopen for the remainder of the school year, if not longer. And as a result, educators at all levels were in a new territory. We had to find ways to reach these students that at the time we were hopeful we were going to see again, perhaps in a week, perhaps in 2 weeks when things settled down. But even with that uncertainty, we had to regroup, we had to devise a plan, we had to provide our students with the top-notch education that they deserved. And we did this while we watched the pandemic unfold before us, where we were not only living with the difficulties of completely changing our instruction, but we were also living this pandemic and the stressors that came with it, the unknown at that time, the chaos that was in our lives and in our students' lives as well. However, COVID did change us, but the lessons we learned along the way may have been a benefit to our instruction and just the catalyst we needed to institute change. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. Again, my background is a high school assistant principal, meant that I dealt a lot with student attendance. And as a result, I conducted a study on the impact of student attendance in academic achievement. And all of us in education, we know innately that there is an impact. When our students are missing class, when they are disengaged, when they are not connecting, we see an impact on academic achievement. However, when I started this study, I found out at the time that there were not a lot of studies in this particular area. And I started doing my research back in 2012, which when I think of that now and the fact that that was 10 years ago, it is amazing to me. It seems like it was just yesterday. But what I learned from that is very much the same a decade later. And so when I was doing my research, I found in a study from Lambden in 1996, where it was concluded that attendance at a school does have a positive influence on student performance. Again, as I was reading this, I found myself thinking, well, of course it does. It certainly has to have a positive impact. And he also found that there is a reasonable presumption that higher attendance at the individual or aggregate level should be associated with a higher level of student performance. Again, it's what we in education already know. A study by Doherty in 2008 indicated that attendance does have a relationship to student performance levels, reinforcing once again what we already know. However, COVID changed us. So what do we do to ensure academic achievement when students cannot be in class, when they cannot attend? So we have to meet students where they are at. The problem is sometimes we don't know where they are at. So if we look back at the past 2 years, again, in March of 2020, we saw massive shutdowns, not only across the United States, but across the world. Suddenly, students at all levels were sent home, families were sent home. Instability was created at all sorts of levels, where when students were sent home, they didn't know, number one, did their family, did their support system, did they have their jobs? If you recall, people's jobs were being cut at all sorts of levels because of the uncertainty in the world. Students disappeared. If you were in instruction at that time, you may have found that some of your students, all of a sudden, you didn't hear from them again because they simply disappeared and you couldn't find them. Also, they were sent home perhaps without a device that they could use to access the content in your classroom. They perhaps did not have reliable internet. If you did have contact with them, they may have been attempting to work off of a smartphone. It may have been a track phone, and they would work when they had minutes and didn't when they did not have minutes. And even when they were working, the interface wasn't all that great. Then we rolled forward into the 2021 school year, where some institutions did remain closed. They did not open. And still we were finding ways to work remotely and connect with those students. However, some institutions did resume. But if you think back to last school year, there were periodic closures where all of a sudden there was a COVID outbreak and the institution closed down for 2 weeks. And students were sent home because we couldn't keep them in their dorms, or we couldn't have them meeting in the classroom. And so they were sent home, or they cut off a semester early. Perhaps your semester or your term was scheduled to end on December 15th, but instead it was cut off at Thanksgiving and everybody was sent home to try to get those numbers down. If you remember the 2020-21 school year, we still did not have any sort of vaccination. We were still learning how this was spread, what the length of infection was. And so we had that uncertainty going on as well. Not only that, that's more at the macro level, but at the micro level, we had students who were met with COVID infections and the isolation requirements that came with that. They were sent home to isolate for 10 days, and they were not having any contact with others during that 10 days. And again, did they have the devices at home that they needed to be successful? Did they have the infrastructure necessary to be successful? And if they themselves weren't suffering from a COVID infection, they may have been a close contact of someone who had. And if it was a family member and they were unable to isolate from that positive family member, they could have been in quarantine for up to 20 plus days. So again, they're not able to get to class and make those connections. Now we're in the 21-22 school year, which things seem to be heading in the right direction. However, we've dealt with, again, the Delta variant, the Omicron variant, and thankfully the isolation time has decreased down to 5 days. However, depending on your institution and the recommendations there is some variability in that. And so we need to find ways to meet students where they are at. We can no longer rely on students consistently being able to be in that classroom. And for some of you, you might be a fully online or remote instructor. And so we have to find ways to meet students where they are at. I spoke a little bit about my research, and one of the things that surprised me coming out of that research is that the study revealed that student absences had more of an effect on students that do not receive special education services than those who do receive special education services. And if you recall, at the time I was working at a high school. So one of the factors that I examined was the impact of student attendance on those who receive special education services versus those who do not. And those who did really did not see the impact on their academic achievement when they weren't in school. So then I found myself wondering, why is this? What is the difference? Well, if you think about the special educations, the students in special education, they are receiving services. They are receiving support and resources, whether they are in the classroom or not. And so I thought about, how does this apply to pandemic and future teaching? Well, we need to provide more support and resources for all students, because we know that there is no longer this guarantee of consistency of being in a physical classroom. Students need to be able to access content and instruction no matter their location. So if they cannot be in the classroom, they cannot physically be there, we need to bring the classroom to the student. They need to feel as if they have that connection. So how do you do that? Well, there are a number of ways you can do that. And I'm just going to show you how I have done this over the past few years. And this has worked not only at the post-secondary level, but also at the K-12 level. So one of the things that we have found to be successful is if you can create an environment that feels like an actual classroom. As you saw, I am a math instructor, and what I have also seen in my students is that they cannot read math. It's very difficult for many students to sit down and look through a math text or read about a concept and be able to decipher much of the content within what they just read. For many, it is a foreign language, and they read through it and find out that they have no idea what they had just read. So what I did was I started to create an environment that feels like a physical classroom. And here's a little glimpse into that classroom. So basically, you are sitting right here in my classroom as long as you watch the video. So So there's just an example of how I attempt to make the environment feel like the traditional physical classroom. For many students, this is what they are accustomed to. This is where they thrive. Now, not to say that this works for everyone, because you'll notice my comment, you have to watch the videos. And depending on the topic, some of my videos for one section can be 30 to 40 minutes because we go through all of the concepts. I work through all of the problems with them. And if you have students who procrastinate, which I do, and they try to save it all for the night that it is due, they find themselves pushed up against the clock and don't have enough time to view the videos. And so really getting out ahead of that and telling your students, you've got to plan for this through the week. You've got to spread it out. Make sure you watch this video by this time, etc. This class, my stats class, is a fully online course. And so you'll notice I recorded that in my classroom. And I'm going to show you a couple of different things that I have done, because I know when I talk to people about this, they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be doing double duty because I'm going to record my lesson. I'm also going to be in my classroom teaching my lesson, etc. So I have some solutions for that as well. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. And it doesn't always go as planned. If you remember at the beginning when I couldn't figure out how to share my PowerPoint correctly, that is what happens. It does not always go as planned. And you know what? That's okay. Your students know that you are human. And if you just laugh along with them, they will probably respect you even more. One of the other interesting things that I find when I record my clips, I don't know how the thumbnail is selected, other than I think the gremlins of the internet find my absolute worst still, and that is the thumbnail that comes on there. So I had to share that, because if you find that your thumbnail looks not great, don't worry, it is true for all of us. So, but again, I laugh, my students laugh. But here's an example of a lesson that did not go as planned. Oh, that is painful to watch. I recorded an entire lesson of the side of my head. So that was a different format. That was for actually a college algebra course. And typically my college algebra courses are online, or excuse me, on ground. And so they are in person. So with that, I typically, and I'll show you what I do, but I typically record as I am teaching. Whereas in this case, I had some students who were going to be absent, and they had asked if they could get the recording beforehand. And so I was recording a lesson quickly, I thought, quickly in my office. And the way I do that when it works is I actually record myself working it out on the paper, recording it through my phone. But for whatever reason, on that one, it recorded from my computer, not from my phone. And as you can see, it was disastrous. However, I will say now I have recorded several terms. And so if I do have a student who has reached out to me and said, I'm not going to be in class, do you have a recording for that lesson? Then I just reach into my prior terms and pull out a recording from that lesson and send it to them. And I just let them know I recorded this in a previous term. Go ahead and use it. And then I will see you when you come back to class. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like when I record actually in class, because it does look a little bit different. So I like to say here, work smarter, not harder. So I do like to record while I am teaching, because then I'm not feeling like I'm doing double duty. I just open up my laptop, start it recording, and away we go. And one of the benefits that was completely unintended, last fall, I came down with a terrible case of laryngitis, and I was able to pull up the recordings from the previous term and play those back for my students in the classroom while pointing, instead of attempting for them to hear me whisper as we went along. This is actually also a recording right after I recorded the side of my head. So here we go. So that's a perfect example of how I do record while I am teaching and still using the Hawks interface as well. And I'll just move my laptop back and forth so they actually see what I am doing in the classroom. I project the Hawks Learn and the Hawks Practice right up onto my board so they can watch as I work out those problems with those in class. And then at the end of the class, I send it out for everyone, because it really accomplishes two things. Number one, those who were unable to be in class for whatever reason can access the lesson at home. And number two, those who were in class and get home and suddenly find themselves at a roadblock and they scramble, they're looking through their notes, they can't remember what I said, they can go back and watch the video. Now, I will say that I learned the hard way not to send my videos out before class, because sometimes the students would watch my video and then not come to class. And I really do want to make that connection with them. And honestly, as long as they're being successful, that's the end result that we want. But I also do want that in-class contact with them. So as I go through, I'm learning along the way. But one of those things that I am learning along the way is communicate, 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 which honestly, this has always been best practice in education, but it's extremely important if you can't have that physical connection with your students being in the classroom. I talked a little bit about that natural procrastination, and I don't know about the others who are math instructors, but I find that a lot of students are not fond of math. And so it's very easy for them to push it aside and just say, I'll do it later, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. And then all of a sudden they have too much piled up to do later. And so watching that happen and getting on that early instead of when it's too late makes a big difference. And so I am constantly monitoring that and reaching out through phone, through email, through messaging systems, and making sure that we are having that contact so that the students don't feel like they are on an island. They don't feel like they're isolated, that they're having that contact, and a little bit of external motivation to keep moving forward, to use those videos, to use those resources. But I will say that I also encourage the students to ask for help when they need it. And there are a few ways that I do this. Number one, we have virtual tutoring times, and those are set up. In fact, I have mine this afternoon at 4 o'clock for my set time, but I'm always willing to set up other times for students too if they need them. But we have virtual tutoring times through Zoom where students can just drop in as they would during a regular tutoring time. They just have access to that link. They click on it, they come in, ask a few questions, and then they can go on with their day. Also, email is great because a lot of times I have students who are working on their assignments in the middle of the night, and I do tell them, I am not going to answer your questions at 2 in the morning because I am old and I go to bed at 10 p.m. And so I'm not checking my email in the middle of the night. So I do have students who will reach out. So here's one example of an email that I got from a student, and she actually emails me quite frequently, and she'll take a picture of her work and just put it in the email and then ask for help that way. Some will ask, they'll type it up and do their best. Sometimes I have to ask for them to take a picture as well. That seems to work. And like on this one, I was able just to type up an answer, but sometimes I will work it out and take a picture of my work and send it back to the students as well. Another thing that I do is also recording. So here are some screenshots from a recording. I had really hoped that I would be able to share the recording as I worked through this problem, but it had too many identifying features that would have revealed the identity of the student. So I was unable to do that. But here was a student that I knew was struggling. So I went into his certify assignment and looked at one of the problems that he was working on, and then worked the problem out for him on a video, on a recording, and then sent it back to him. He was able to get past that roadblock and move on. And so doing something like that oftentimes helps the students get through that. And even though I do work out all of the problems in my recording, sometimes there's just a little tiny key part that they are missing. And if I can figure that out and work that out in a video, I can get that passed for them and they can move on from there. One of the great things about Hawks that I really, really appreciate is timely feedback. Because if you think about the student who perhaps is going through a class doing a paper and pencil assignment, they might do an entire assignment completely wrong. And then suddenly they have quote unquote learned their mistakes. They have embedded the wrong thing into their minds and the wrong algorithms, the wrong process, etc. And so Hawks is really great in my opinion because the students know immediately whether or not they got the question correct. So if you look here on my first example, sailed right through, got the question right, I'm free to keep moving on. However, on this one, I typed it in wrong, and so I got the wrong answer. And there are a couple of things that, again, the student can access so that they have that immediate feedback. They can find their error, And if you'll notice down here, there's the little button that says explain error, and they can click through that and it will take them step by step through that. And for a lot of my students, that's all they need to keep going. They don't necessarily need to reach out and have me walk them through it, because they themselves have found their error through using the tutor or the explain error, the solution button within Hawks. Or they might look at it, they look back at their work, and they notice they just typed it in incorrectly. So if you look here, I accidentally typed an extra X in there. They can try again, remove that X, get the correct answer, and keep going if that happens to be the case.
Dr. Johnke, I hate to interrupt,
Yes.
but I do want to give you a 10-minute warning if you do want to have time at the end for questions. So
yes,
just wanted to give you that warning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And so another great feature is the send to instructor. And I will tell you, you do have to enable this yourself. And so if you have not enabled this, I really like this feature, because if a student is stuck, they will click on this button and it will email me a screenshot and send it off to me, which again, I tell them 2 a.m. I'm not answering questions, but I will get to it at 8 a.m. when I am up and when they are sleeping. And so it sends it off. I can work through the problem, whether that is a video or working it out on paper, on a screenshot, etc. So where to start? Start small. You are not going to need to go out and do big things right away. I started by just recording the lessons as I taught them. And as I went through that, I learned my mistakes. I found what I needed to tweak or change, and I didn't feel like I was doubling my workload. Start small. Do what you can do right away so that the students have access where they are at. And find the platform that works for you. You can record it through Zoom, through YouTube, Skype, Google, even your phone. There are so many options now that you can access. Find the one that works for you. And don't be afraid. You saw one of my greatest mistakes, and you just have to laugh at yourself. That's okay. It's a learning process, and you just make the changes that will make you successful. So to summarize, you probably found that I can talk forever, but I will start summarizing so that if there are any questions, we have time for those. The COVID-19 pandemic changed the way we think about delivery of education because we had to. Many found themselves in a place where they had to undo everything that had been successful, perhaps for decades. However, finding creative resources that can be accessed anywhere at any time is a benefit to all students. Again, I talked about my students who are working on their assignments at 2 in the morning, and that might be the only time that they have available to work on their assignments. So having that access is a benefit whether they are being impacted by COVID or not. They're able to work at their own time, at their own pace, in their own setting. So when we meet students where they are at, we help them find success. So any questions?
If anyone has questions, again, feel free to use that Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we can go through them there.
I just saw a comment from Eddie. So it makes me feel better. Eddie put on, I worked those exact binomial probability distributions literally 2 hours ago in my stats class. So it makes me feel better that it's not just my students who are struggling with those problems. Once they pick up the pattern though, they've got it. Next question, you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious if you find that students aren't as interested in attending class when you provide additional online resources. Yes, and so it's all about your setup. So interestingly, one term, here's our setup here at South College. All of our assignments are due on Tuesday nights at 11:59 p.m. And I was teaching an on-ground stats class on Monday night from 5:45 to 9:35. The problem with that was that all of the assignments then, so we went through the content and then all of the assignments were due the next day. So I was sending out my videos on the Wednesday before to give students enough time to complete the work. But as you said, they then were not interested in attending class because they were accessing that from home. So what I have gone to, which I know I alluded to a little bit, was that I don't send my recordings out until after the class. So it motivates the students to be in the class and get that access to me in person. And it really does seem to help. And so looking at my in-person classes that I'm teaching right now, I'm going to say my attendance rate is sitting probably 90 to 95% every day. And so that seems to work on my end. And some will say, I do watch the videos, but I like to be able to ask that personal question live so I can get my immediate feedback and make sure that my question is also answered. So that really does help. And depending on your setup and your requirements at your institution, finding motivators for them to go to class, whether it is an attendance policy, again, you would have to look at your institution and those and your abilities to do that, but some do allow an attendance policy and give a credit for attendance, or maybe you have a little bonus when they're in class, things like that, that are also motivators, just knowing that sometimes the students will take advantage of that access and work from home.
We do have a little bit more time. So again, if you have any questions, I know it sometimes takes a little bit of time to think about what you want to ask, but please feel free to put them in the Q&A at the bottom. We'll make sure to hit on them as we get them.
And so as I said, I can talk forever, so I'll just keep talking for, what have we got, about 3 minutes left, so 2 minutes left. And so I'll talk a little bit, but please feel free to ask those questions as you're going through. But I've also found that sometimes when students aren't coming to class, there are things that are going on in their lives as well that are impacting their ability to attend. And so honestly, when they stop attending, or if they stop attending, I will reach out and see what is going on. So I'm particularly struggling with connection to my, yes, online students, tips with these students. So that is a tough one because they really, really want to sit back and not connect. Sometimes they're taking those online courses because they don't want to connect. And so I try to find ways to reach out to them. So a lot of times I will try a phone call. Sometimes they block my calls and they will not take my call. One thing that has really worked for me really well is I have a Google phone number set up. And so I send out a text message through my, when I said Google phone, again, I'm old, Google Voice. So I can text my students through Google Voice, and a lot of times the students will respond to that. And so if you have a platform where you are able to do that, whether it's Google Voice or Blackboard Connect or whatever it is, that platform that you have, I found sometimes the texting does the trick, and picking out things where you see that they are struggling with. Hey, I saw that you didn't get this assignment completed. Is there something I can do for you? Or even just, I saw you were struggling with this. Here's a video I made. Let me know if I can help you. And that has really seemed to get through to some of those students who didn't want to respond to my emails or my messages in Canvas or my phone calls. Any other questions? I see we're at 1:45, but I am willing to ask any other questions if there are any others. All right. With that said, I just want to thank everybody for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. I know you are really busy and have busy lives, so thank you for taking this time with me today.
Yes, and thank you so much for the valuable information you shared with us today, Dr. Jonke. And we appreciate you being here today. But for everyone else, the next concurrent session will begin at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I have gone ahead and sent in the chat a list of our other sessions, meeting room links, and access to our conference website for a complete list of the concurrent sessions and their descriptions. And while accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. There you can view a quick 5-minute demonstration and be entered to win the hourly giveaway. So that will be your choice of a 6-month subscription to Audible, 1-year subscription to Disney Plus, or a $100 Amazon gift card, which are all wonderful prizes, at least in